All right, I think we're on. Hi, this is Charlie Zeiss with Stargate Pyramids. Joining me today is Lori Sasson and Bill McKenzie. Bill's experiencing some technical difficulties, so will only be available to us, it looks like today, by sound only, but he's with us. And we thank all of you for joining in today. We've still got a minute or two before we need to start, so before we begin, I will relate to you. I just was on last night with Richard Hoagland on his show, The Other Side of Midnight. I was his guest last night for 3 hours. We talked all things pyramids, particularly the Stargate and Russian geometry pyramids. And Richard surprised me with some very, very interesting photos that he had found actually from the moon. These photos tend to indicate that it looks like these pyramidal objects are virtually identical, if not identical, to some of the Buddhist temples that are found in Southeast Asia. In particular, he compared it to one that I have in my file for Myanmar or Burma. So this is a fascinating thing. And while we're waiting, I don't know, Lori, if you want to talk about that, because I think you've got some insights on that as well.
It was so fantastic. You did such a great job on the show last night. I had never heard of Richard Hoagland's show. I heard of him, but I've never listened to one of his shows. And it was just a great show. You did very well. I was surprised at the knowledge. Of course, we share this knowledge every Monday, but I mean, there was some other good stuff that you brought about and he brought about. And even like he mentioned something about the connection to Ukraine and these pyramids. And I thought this is getting really fascinating. We're going into some really interesting territory.
Well, that's true. I mean, the Ukraine story, I may have brought part of it up that, in fact, Dr. Golod mentioned when on his website that during the 2014 revolution, so-called, on the Maidan, that a pyramid was used in part to program the people potentially to more violent and revolutionary type activities. So
Wow.
fascinating stuff. So, well, I think it's time we can begin now. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, if you'd like to join us live, you can join us at the link, the Zoom link that we have provided. Otherwise, we'll be happy to take your questions over the live chat on YouTube. So I'm going to open up right now the share screen. The first thing I want to do today is to show you a video. I was actually at the gym yesterday and happened to see not this video, but a musical video which was filmed at this location. But this is actually something, believe it or not, that NBC News carried on its YouTube channel about a year ago, and actually a year and 2 days ago. So I'm going to show it to you, and you'll see why I'm so fascinated by this. Lori was able to find actually this location of this, and that's why we've got a video of this without the music. So I'm going to turn this on and show it to you, and then we can comment. So we'll stop it right there. But just to see Lester Holt doing this on NBC, it's just such a shocker to me. I don't think they have any earthly idea what they are exposing here in terms of the secrets of the Tartarian Empire. But as you can see, each of those was a replica. It had both the cone shape and the pyramid shape of the Tartarian architecture. And we'll be talking a lot more about this as time goes on, but it looks as though they've replicated the look, but they don't have any idea as to what the adornments and so forth on top were all about, that they were antennas and so forth. So this is nothing more than, as the video said, a Disneyland-like or Disney-esque version of Tartarian architecture. So, Lori, I'm sure you may have some thoughts.
527 of those built in Murdernu, outside of Burj Al Babas. That's amazing. I mean, this place is just incredible, and I'm just like, how did they develop so many if they didn't have the funding behind it? And now that it's there, I'm like, it's just incredible. There's got to be something that those shapes are doing in that area. I truly believe that there's something it's doing. It's creating some type of transformation just by the shapes of those being there. So that's very fascinating to me.
Oh, it is. And it was begun in 14. I thought it had ended when I first read that, Lori, in 14, but 2014 was the time of the so-called revolution in Ukraine. So I don't know if there's any correlation there, but there were a couple of things that I also wanted to mention from Richard's in my talk last night. Richard had on the show some slides about this pyramid, these pyramid complexes on the moon. So if those of you are interested, go listen to the presentation from last night. You can go to theothersideofmidnight.com, and you will find the photographs that I brought in, that Richard brought in, and it was really a very lively discussion. And I think we broke some new ground there. I know Richard has asked me to come back again after I know more about the topic that we're going to be talking about today, namely the Tartarian Empire. So I promised him that once I felt comfortable talking about all of these topics intelligently, I would do that. I may even see if Richard would be willing to allow me to bring on some of the real experts from this field, and we can maybe do that jointly in the future. So anyway, with that said, I'm going to open up the screen, and we can begin to go over the slides for today. So bear with me as I get that pulled up. Just bear with me for a minute. And we'll get back to where we ended up last time. I believe we had stopped at Chicago.
Yes.
And so let's see if we can't start there. Now this berm, I'll show you this. This is essentially the look of the object that he saw or showed pictures of from the moon last night. Was something that looked very, very similar to that slide that we looked at last week. So Here we are back at Chicago. This is where we left off from last week. These slides are from, I believe it was called the Pan American Exposition in Chicago. Many people, as we discussed last week, have found that the city of Chicago, via old maps, predated our knowledge in our history books about the establishment of Chicago. And as we go through, we're going to find that a lot of cities such as Chicago probably were pre-existing through the existence of all of this architecture. And this seems to be yet another example that we'll see of architecture that's been torn down. They've seem to have used the excuse of having these world expositions there, and then tearing down these beautiful buildings after the exhibitions were over. So this one is from 1890. You'll see a beautiful lake area there. Here's another picture from the end of it. A beautiful water area and these beautiful Tartarian buildings all around the lake area. And here's another picture. I think we saw this last week as well. This so-called temporary structure at the top was torn down to make the way for that series of insignificant contemporary buildings on the bottom. And here's another picture of that same building in 1893 and the Chicago Tribune Tower. So here's where we actually left off from last week. This is a picture from the inside of the Chrysler building. This is a building that I had originally targeted and seen as one for Tartarian architecture. And this is a view looking out onto the Manhattan skyline from inside the very top portion of the Chrysler building. So here is another example of the Tartarian architecture in a church. And one of the things that we're going to begin to discuss in the next couple of weeks are the free energy systems that were developed by this empire and used. If you'll notice, not only, of course, are there all of these spires, but if you'll notice these little nodules on the side and also on the top, I've come to learn, and we'll be doing sections on this, these are what are called fractal antennas. And fractal antennas are used to pick up frequencies from the air. And we're also going to be talking about some people on YouTube and experts in this area who can explain these kinds of fractal antennas. The one thing I will say going forward, we're going to be having some pictures that you'll see this of in the next couple of weeks, but this person from Russia explains that both the six-sided Star of David as well as the Christian cross turn out to actually, in reality, be very, very fine fractal antennas. And we'll get into the mathematics of that in the future, but just something to be aware of as you watch these photos, that buildings such as this with all of these nodes around them were very likely, in the opinion of many researchers, actually power plants or healing centers before the fall of the empire. So something to keep in mind. Here's another picture of another church with this similar architecture with these nodes, and these are just antennas. This is all energy, Antiquitech as it's called, on this church. Here's two more pictures of what we now call churches from France and Germany. I wish I had gotten the tops of the one in France on the left a little bit better, but you can see that the tops of these do not have traditional crosses, but actually have antennas on top, which from a distance very much look like the crosses of Christianity, but when you get closer up for inspection, are actually, in this researcher's view, antennas. And here again, similar, here's two more in Austria and Sweden that I found, and you're going to see once again no crosses on top, but in fact we have some sort of an antenna effect on the top of all of these spires and onion domes. Here's just another picture from Thomas Cole, a drawing showing Tartarian architecture and a beautiful building. I'm not exactly sure where this was painted, but some gorgeous architecture that I'm sure no longer exists. Oh, here domestically is another example. This is actually the Cincinnati Music Hall in Cincinnati, Ohio. You'll see once again, and this is a very common characteristic of Tartarian architecture. You're going to see dual spires or towers, and according to some of the researchers, they come in pairs on purpose, and it has to do with energy generation or reception. Lori, I'll let you talk to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, so from what you're reading, do you need two of them in pairs in order for them to function?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing to point out, and we'll, if you look at the center where my cursor is, this is very characteristic of these types of buildings that formerly may have been power generation plants, which in fact this music hall may have been at one time. They have this circular stained glass, and you see this in a lot of churches. And if any of you have ever wondered, well, what is that geometry, or what is that all about? There's a researcher actually that I found out about over the last week, and we just touched on in the last session. Her name is Tanya Harris, and if you go to YouTube and look up Tanya Harris, you'll find her YouTube channel. But she has gone in and has actually recorded the resonant frequency, or the resonance of these buildings, and has found when she converts that and turns it into a cymatic diagram, that it seems to correlate very highly with the stained glass that we find in these buildings. So a thesis that at least has been partially developed, and I need to check to see how much more she's done since the original video, but research that we're hoping, this is the kind of research that we're hoping to be able to accomplish with the Pyramid Science Foundation as well, to do this kind of research and see if there's a correlation between the resonant frequencies of these buildings and the cymatic formations that show up on these stained glass windows. Here's a picture from Cologne, Germany. This researcher, as you can see, says that all of these buildings, as well as the bridge itself, were built by Tartarian civilization. Once again, a temple or a church, and perhaps in this case with very high dual towers or spires. And Lori, what do you get from those towers? Are those receptors, generators? What do you think?
I get they're both. And what's so interesting to me is I start thinking of other things that look a lot like that, like the Disney castle in Walt Disney World and stuff like that. I'm just amazed at how many structures we have of this that originated from Tartarian. So that is just fascinating to me.
Oh, it is. It is. Here's another pic. This is just a close-up to get you a little bit better picture of those towers. Now, Cologne was, just by way of digression, was again one of the cities that was built upon or had a star fortress or fort built around it. So we think that that city was one of these cities from all around the world. I just found out that Pittsburgh had a star fort where I used to live. So that you find them everywhere. But those were centers of high culture and probably free energy as well. Now, this is a picture of Coney Island from way back in the day, and you can see that this spire architecture, and these are not crosses on here, but they appear to be, once again, energy devices that were enhancing those buildings at Coney Island. So another example. Now here's a picture from Constantinople. This is a drawing, and you can see once again back. This was done by a painter who lived around the late 1700s. I guess this was drawn, and you can see all of these towers in Constantinople. Constantinople was, again, a star fort or fortress. There's a lot of the walls of that original city were still up in the early part of the 20th century, and I think we'll have a photo of that. But again, notice all of these dual spires or dual towers. There seems to be a need to have two of them in order to affect these free energy techniques.
Well, in this in particular, it seems as though they have a lot of power. I mean, even just what they were wanting to relay to outsiders and the actual energy that it brought about is power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now here's a great example of this cymatic stained glass. This is coming from Strasbourg, Germany, and is inside of a church. But it's this kind of a pattern that will develop in water or with sand. You can do it in any different number of ways using this technique of cymatics, which again is really just a way of converting a sound, which is a frequency, to a geometry. And quite honestly, the pyramid is an example of taking geometry and converting it to vibration. So
how many of those are there? Can you count?
No, I can count roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks like 32.
Well, and that's why I wondered, is it 32 or maybe 33? That's what I was wondering.
Well, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 32.
Okay, awesome. Wow, interesting.
Yeah. So again, this is what inspired Tanya Harris, and she's been doing that work. For those of you interested, she's also got a website, which is tanyaharris.co.uk. So you can go check this out. I'll put that down in the comment section of this video after we're finished. Here's a picture of Tartarian architecture in the city of Detroit in the late 1900s. This architecture was everywhere in the United States. And I believe this was part of an exhibition as well. You can see some spires in the background. Here is an example of what this particular researcher deems was a power station in Dresden, Germany. And having worked in the utility world, I mean, I see this and it caught my eye right away. When you think about lighthouses or tall towers, you're always going to see alternating stripes, horizontal stripes of white in either some sort of an orange, brown, red color. I am color deficient in that area, so I'm not sure sometimes what color is what. But that design, as you can see on this tower, is a apparently a designation that has run throughout time to continue to designate this as an energy transformer of some sort. So,
Sure is. Sure is.
okay, so you're getting the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah.
Okay, so this person is saying that's what that was. Now, here's another picture of the Dresden skyline. And again, for those of you who may recall World War II, Dresden was one of the cities that was bombed extremely heavily by Allied forces. And many people questioned, why did we spend all of this effort bombing a city that had very little strategic military significance? So I don't have an answer for that, but it may be that this was yet another way to get rid of examples of this classic Tartarian architecture. Don't know. Do you get any read on that, Lori?
Well, when you say that, I mean, here's the thing. Here's this empire that was able to transform and do things that other people were unaware of and just didn't have the knowledge. So that's what they were trying to destroy, something they were unaware of. And I mean, that happens in all societies everywhere. I mean, look at us. We don't understand underdeveloped cultures, so we want to go in and put in plumbing and other things in these countries that are like, what, we've been doing this all along. What do we need this for? So
Sure.
I mean, it's just fascinating to me. I think it was just, maybe some jealousy, maybe some not understanding, not wanting this empire to continue to be.
Mm-hmm.
So many things. That's why I can't wait to really dive in to find out what's going on with this empire. Why is this the first time we're hearing about it in the last 6 weeks?
Well,
It just blows my mind.
I listened over the weekend to some of the videos. One of the researchers, John Levy, I believe it, or maybe it was Martin Leakey, was mentioning that there's going to actually be the first Tartarian conference that's going to be held perhaps later this year. I'll try to have that information for the live stream next week.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So here is a diagram once again of this city being a star fort or star fortress. We can see the outline. Once again, the city is encased inside of this fortress, and there's water flowing through, which seems to be a common characteristic as well, that water is important to this. Does that statement resonate with you, Lori?
It does. And yet, as I'm looking at this, just imagine this. Okay. So imagine the four corners are like what our pyramid is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just interesting. So you have a circle around that, but then that, and then within it is the rest of the star fortress that you're talking about.
Right.
How fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And there seems to be there are some people out there who say that actually the geometry of these star fortresses are themselves shaped as fractal antennas and may have actually had something to do with the free energy system throughout the world.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Lots of power there.
Yes. So here are some pictures as well of the Eiffel Tower. One, we see an older drawing where apparently energy was being generated from the tower and was being beamed down to looks like a building on the ground, and actually in several locations. We'll be getting to this as well, but some of the researchers say that you need two large towers like this in combination with water. That's a common characteristic that you find in all of these tower configurations. So, and also we'll see at the top here, this antenna from the top of the Eiffel Tower, again, looks like some sort of a fractal antenna that could have been used in the generation of free energy. or may still be for that matter. Here again is another example of this. If you'll see this alternating white and, Lori, you tell me, is that orange, red? What is that?
Yeah, it looks red to me.
Red color. Okay. And this again is indicative of a power station. If this is now the St. Pancras railway station in London, but
I do resonate with that, but the paint, the red and white doesn't mean anything, does it?
well, it seems to have been carried forward. It seems to have been a way to designate these as power stations.
Oh, I see. Just kind of like its symbol or whatever. I
That's
see what
right,
you're
and
saying. Yeah,
that's continued through to today, where our
interesting.
lighthouses have the same striping as well as very tall towers,
Ah,
electrical towers. So it seems like that concept of this striping, this marking, has continued from Tartarian days on into the present. So we'll be seeing some pictures of some contemporary electrical towers as well that have the similar kinds of markings. And I guess I was attuned to that, having worked in the electric utility industry. I saw towers like this with this kind of marking all the time.
so interesting. I'm getting that this is a transformer, and you're saying it does what?
Well, a transformer. This would have been a power plant, I believe. So this,
Mm-hmm.
at least according to this researcher, these stripes designate that this generated power, from what I understand.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So here's some more pictures of, these are before and afters. We had some beautiful architecture there in Amsterdam, which has been torn down to make way for this contemporary office building.
Doesn't even compare. Good grief.
No. Similarly, in a beautiful old Tartarian building in Essen, Germany, that's been torn down to make way for another contemporary building of some sort. Here is another example of architecture that's, I may pronounce this wrong, Fetis, I don't know, college in Edinburgh, Scotland. This is just, I mean, look at this architecture. I mean, there are spires, there's spires and pyramids of all sorts and shapes and sizes here. But do you get any read, Bill or Lori, as to what this may have originally been?
Well, I do get free energy, but I don't feel fractal antennas. I don't feel transformer or anything like that, but I do get free energy coming in.
Yeah. So it doesn't look as though from a distance that there's at least the extent of the antenna design that we've seen in other places, but clearly an example of Tartarian architecture now in Scotland. Here's a French chateau, again with the same architecture. Now here we can see the rods coming out that were probably, again, antennas that were used in some fashion for the generation or receipt of free energy.
Well, we see two there. There could be four just on the other side. We're not able to see the other side, but I felt like it always had to be even in order for the energy to do what it needed to do.
Yeah. So, I see right here, I'm pointing my cursor at the very tip of what's probably the opposing one to this one. So there's probably one that's opposite this on the other side that we can't see. You're probably right. Here's again, a church in Bamberger, Germany. Again, dual spires on both ends. And as you can see, these spires have this fractal antenna on top, which, if it looks at a distance like a Christian cross, but when you get up closer, and we'll see more examples of this, this was actually it looks like it was a fractal antenna.
And it's just power they're receiving coming in. There's lots of power coming in.
Yeah, yeah. Here's this is actually now the YMCA in Glasgow, Scotland.
Oh,
Once,
nice.
and there we go. Now here, it's hard to tell. Yep, these still look like fractal antennas on top, as
Yes,
opposed to
yes, they do. Yep.
traditional Christian crosses. And we
So
see,
here's a transmitter receiver building. So this is doing both, where the one before was only receiving.
okay, oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
Now here's one that I think is particularly interesting because this is from Pisa, Italy. And the thing that's important, we haven't shown this yet, but the Tartarian, the symbol on the Tartarian flag empire is the griffin. And so here is a building with a griffin on top of it in Pisa. So this researcher feels that this is a Tartarian building and that this was a power station complex as well.
I would agree.
What's a griffin again, Charlie?
I'm sorry, Bill?
What's a griffin?
A griffin is a so-called mythological creature that's has, it's a quadruped with wings, but it is the symbol.
Like a Pegasus. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the symbol of it's on the flag of the Tartarian Empire.
So it's a flying horse?
Was the flag what?
Is it a flying horse?
Yeah, like a Pegasus. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Now here is a picture I found of the tallest buildings in the world at the time that this was drawn. And as we could see, almost all of the tall buildings in the old world, as it's called, I don't have a date for this, were either these onion domes or spires that were built in the shape of this geometry. We're going to
So these are, transmitter, receivers, transformers. That's all of it.
Yeah.
It's generating a lot of stuff here. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can see all of these adornments are on top. These are part of an antenna system. You can see these kind of nodes or nodules on a lot of these towers, which were probably part of the fractal antenna systems as well. So, lots to see here, but this architecture was everywhere in the old world of Europe. Here's probably the most classic example that I have seen of Tartarian architecture. This is the Hungarian Parliament building, and I see. I mean, it's so classic. This is a classic example. So again, we have the dome in the center, and I'm not sure if what Laurie feels about this, but we've got these towers and spires all over with looks like antennas on the top.
Yeah, the same thing as the last picture: transformer, transceiver, and it transmit, receives, and it's a transformer. So all of the above. And
Wow.
this is still standing, correct?
Yes, this is the contemporary Hungarian Parliament building.
Excellent.
So this was one. Budapest was again a star fort city, and we'll see that. Here's the interior of the Hungarian Parliament building. Just look at the
wow
thing.
Wow.
This is it's just unbelievable how gorgeous this building is. So moving back to the U.S., this is actually the Iowa State Capitol. Again, classic onion dome with antennas on top. And it looks like these could have actually, these antennas look real in the sense that unlike that subdivision we saw from Turkey a few minutes ago, these look like they're original and could have potentially been functional at one point.
This is weird. I don't get that they were. I don't know if this is more decorative or but I don't get that it's transmitting. I don't get that it's receiving. I don't get that it's a transformer. I don't get any of that on these, but it's gorgeous. I mean,
Well, and so, that's an interesting point. I'm glad. That's why, I always value your input. This building was actually built after a lot of this Tartarian architecture started to be destroyed. So this may have just been built based upon plans like many churches are today. They'll build the steeples into the architectural design and not have any idea of what their real function or purpose was. So,
Question, Charlie.
right.
yeah.
Do the ribs on the domes have anything to do with negating the energy?
And I would say yes. Boy, it makes me cough. And
You
the
talking
ribs are
about
those actual like windows.
these things?
Yeah.
They look like windows from a distance, but it's kind of hard to know. But that's what it looks like to me. But this
And
was
Bill's right. All the other ones we've seen have been smooth and been nice and just rounded, and then they have the antenna on top.
yeah. I don't know. So that is a good question for debate because of the timing of the building of this. It may be that they were just copying pre-existing designs and didn't know anything about the energetics. Don't know. Here's one from Istanbul. Again, this is this could have been a power plant. Don't know. What are you getting, Lori?
I get it's a transformer.
Okay.
It receives. It does not transmute. So that's interesting. But again, this is a perfect example of what Bill was saying at the last dome. And you see that particular type of curve quite a ways down and nothing obstructing it. So interesting.
Yeah. Here is a picture, an old drawing from actually the what is probably the only remaining area that's actually kept its Tartarian heritage to any great degree, and that's the state of Tatarstan within Russia. And so these are examples of some of the architecture. You can see the onion domes as well as the spires that were located in that city. So an ancient example of that architecture.
And that looks similar to Siberia, right?
Yes. Tatarstan is, I think, in Western Siberia. I'm not exactly sure, but yeah, it's.
Isn't that an oxymoron, Charlie? Western Siberia?
Good question. I'm trying to make a distinction between Eastern Siberia near Alaska. That I know Sarah Palin has under control with her binoculars. So anyway, this is a picture of another building in Kazan in Tatarstan in Russia. Another clear example of this spire architecture in ancient times. Now here, this is a classic. This is a picture of the Kremlin, and although there are some spires on the Kremlin building per se, there are also a number of these onion domes. I find it interesting that some of these domes, actually all but this one, end up demonstrating the geometry of the phi spiral, which I think is fascinating in and of itself. If you look at the upward sloping vertical lines on the one that I'm pointing to now, and also these two onion domes, these outcroppings on the onion dome itself are indicative of the way a plant would grow, conforming to the phi spiral. And then, of course, you have the traditional Russian pyramid geometry / Stargate pyramid geometry in these two. So I'll just throw the question. Oh, and here's a couple more smaller ones. Are you able, Lori or Bill, to come up with any ideas at this point as to how these domes and spires may have functioned together?
Well, I'm being told this is just a receiver building. So this is just receiving energy, not transmuting or not a transformer, but how they work together.
If they're receiving, maybe they're just receiving different energies then.
Well, and I'm being told that all of this together is just blocking negative energy. So I don't know what type of building this is or what it's like inside, but I'd be interested to know, is it like a peaceful place? Is this a place where people pray? I mean,
well, this is the Kremlin.
I don't know what that is.
That's, I believe, the official state office building for Russia.
Where Putin is, or?
Yeah, in his office and so forth. This would be, I don't want to say it would be like the White House. I'm not sure if it's a residence. Maybe people out there.
I see. I've heard the name Kremlin, but I just didn't realize that that's what it was, a political building is what you're saying.
Right. Mm-hmm. It probably, I don't know that it was historically, but it is now.
Well, and interesting, maybe somebody that built it knew what they were doing, but not necessarily the people inside the building understand the architecture.
Well, if we follow through on the Tartarian empire theory, this may have very well been Tartarian architecture that has been preserved by the Russians. We've discussed that that Stalin, rewrote the history books about Tartary, and that's one of the major reasons why we don't know about this. So it may have been, just as many of the government buildings around the world are theorized to have been taken over from the Tartarian Empire to be government buildings around the world. So don't know. I have no idea what this means, if anything, but I saw it and I had to measure it. Have protractor will measure. This is a letter in the Russian alphabet that also has the geometry of the Russian pyramid and Stargate pyramid. So just a little fun thing there. We're moving on to Manhattan. This is a picture of Lower Manhattan in the 1950s. I found this yesterday. There is a website called oldnyc.org, oldnyc.org, and you literally can go look at Manhattan and most of New York City on a block by block basis, and you will be able to click on a dot, and up will come all of these historic pictures of what Manhattan looked like anywhere from the 1860s up through the 1950s. So you'll see here a number of buildings in Lower Manhattan in the 50s that had the Tartarian architecture on the top of the buildings, indicating their origin. So as Bill had mentioned last week, there's any number of buildings, and if you go to this oldnyc.org, you're going to find them that used to exist in Manhattan. Some of the smaller ones still do, but a lot of these larger examples have been torn down for various reasons. So here's another picture, a drawing from showing medieval spires. I'm not sure exactly, I can't read where this is, but I saw this picture, and it just shows these spires and this geometry, this free energy system seemed to be available and in plentiful supply in even the medieval times.
Right.
Here's another example. This is called the Midland Grand Hotel in London. It was completed in 1875. Once again, classic Tartarian spires, and we're seeing the antennas at the top of these spires. Are you getting anything from this, Lori?
Again, I get that they're transmitters, receivers, and transformation. So it's just fascinating. I wish I could just type into Google what buildings knew how to transmit and receive energies and also become a transformer.
Right, right. So,
wish it was that simple. I mean,
wouldn't that be
it
nice?
should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So Lori, when you say transformer, what exactly do you mean?
Energetically being able to take the energy and do something with it.
So is it more like a relay station?
Yeah.
Is that a better word? Relay?
That's a better word.
Okay.
It's just almost like the power source of other buildings.
Well, let me see if I can try this. I remember my electric train set as a kid had a transformer which would take 120 volt power and convert it to something else. It would transform it into a different voltage. Would that be potentially, or a different frequency?
That resonates to what you're saying. And that's what I'm saying. I want to know how they did this. I am so fascinated by this.
Yep.
And why aren't we doing it? And maybe that's it. Maybe this new world order, it's come to the point where we can't stand it anymore. We're going back to this free energy, which we should have been using all along.
Sure, sure.
Okay, so just to be clear, so it's taking a form of energy or frequency and changing it into a different frequency or energy?
So it's receiving its free energy, and then it's doing whatever it needs to, then put it out or to be that transformer other buildings need to be.
Okay, thank you.
So it would be interesting to see like a bigger photo of this to see, do they have like a star fortress like you're talking about, Charlie? Was there something during that time that there was something like that and we don't know?
Well, there were star fortresses all around the world, and we'll probably watch some videos or some segments in future episodes that will focus on specific star fortresses and antennas and so forth as we move through here. We're starting to get people, I think, aware of some of these concepts, so hopefully we can maybe breeze through most of these this week and we can start to focus in on some of these specific topics.
Has anyone written in or said any comments while we're doing this?
Well, let me take a break here and we'll find out, because we're only up to the M's and we're already 50 minutes through. Let's see. Penguin 213 says, I lived in Dresden for a while, lived next to that building, basically. Michael Phillips, Dresden was supposed to be a safe place for civilians and was firebombed. February 14th is part of a pagan ritual known as conflagration. Okay. Dresden really made me realize that they obviously wanted to destroy architecture. That's Michael.
This guy is Michael Phillips?
Yes, who was on with us last week. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. He's not the time traveler, right? No. Okay, never mind.
Okay. Corey Brown, is it the Grand Kremlin Palace? Maybe he was referring to the piece we had up. If so, look at it on Google satellite. There's a large starburst coming from the top of it. I know exactly what he's talking about. There's some videos. I saw one yesterday, and it may have been hovering where they had a drone hovering, and it may have been over the Kremlin. And all of these designs, there are these starburst designs that he's talking about. So let's see. Hatley says, no, that is St. Basil's Cathedral in Red Square. Oh, the Kremlin also contains the offices of the government, but this is and was a church. My mistake.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. I was not aware of that, and I had that wrong. So does that make more sense? Let's go back to that.
For me, it does, because it was wanting no negative energy and peace within inside. So that makes more sense to me.
Okay. All right.
What's the name of this cathedral again?
It's called St. Basil's Cathedral in Red Square.
Okay. I did not know that either.
Yeah, I didn't. I thought that was the Kremlin all the time. My mistake. So anyway, here's another example of the spires. This has to be some sort of an energy building in Milan. If you just look at all the Antiquitech, this can't be anything but. But I'll ask Lori, what are you getting?
Well, I'm getting it's a receiver of energy.
Receiver. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. We'll move on to Milwaukee. Milwaukee also had a great deal of this Tartarian architecture in the late 1800s. Here's some examples of it. Another building in 1891 in Milwaukee as well. Now we're getting to the Salt Lake Mormon Temple that we started to talk about last week. And quite honestly, I have some slides because I was up with Richard last night. I got some additional slides I meant to put in today, and I'll try to bring them in maybe next week or in the future. But the one viewer who was, talking about the age of the Salt Lake Temple, I just wanted to show these pictures that demonstrate that. Here's what got me started. I saw this. This is classic Tartarian architecture.
Right.
With the spires and all of the smaller spires around it, as you can see.
Right.
Yeah, I'm seeing these as they're classic energy antennas.
Mhm.
So that's where we're starting from, and what I subsequently found after I did that video were these pictures, and there are others like it, where the temple was under reconstruction. And this gets into the concept of the mud flood. There are so many examples, and we'll do this as well as a special subject in the near future. There are so many examples like this around the world where older architecture is found to have been buried, at least in part, under the earth. And it depends on the part of the country, the part of the world that you're in, how deep that may be. But here we're showing some examples of the Salt Lake Temple where they're doing some renovations. And you can see this depiction shows that there is a 14-foot line distance, apparently, from the base of this up to the ground level. And if you see all of this area underneath here that most, I would think, rationally would have been above ground when it was built, is
Right.
now covered with dirt. So
That's amazing.
I'm going to throw that out and see what you get. What are you getting, Lori?
I just find it fascinating. I mean, where's your mind going with that, Charlie? What are you thinking?
Well, if you look, for example, the stairway going up here in the middle of the picture, you can see that opening went all the way down originally, and it looks as though this stairway was put in after the ground level seemed to have risen through some cataclysmic event, which many of the researchers are calling a mud flood. But
that's what I thought it was, as a mud flood. But
yeah.
So when we look at things like, for example, this building, I'm told, is transmitting and receiving energy. But then I asked the question, aren't we doing the same thing in our pyramids? And we absolutely are. We're not transformers, but we are transmitters and receivers of energy. Well,
Right.
what that energy is, it really depends on what we're putting out and what we're meant to put out. So in for instance, as a church like that in Salt Lake City, they're looking for a lot of power. So a power in the sense of people, of the culture, of what the church believes in. So, I mean, it's interesting to me that there was a mud flood. And how many times have you heard of mud flood?
I hadn't heard of it at all until about 7 weeks ago.
6 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
Right, in the Tartarian Empire.
When this picture was taken?
I don't have a date for it, Bill.
Do you know when a mud flood could have happened?
Yeah, most of the people think that it happened sometime in the 1800s, probably around 1850 to 1875.
Just before.
Well, again,
just before sort of meteorological records started to take hold, which is interesting.
Right. Yeah, that is. And that's the other thing. I mean, again, we've talked about these pyramids, cause and create water. And you're even saying at times they need water in order to do what they do. So, I mean, we have a lot of homework to do here to try and figure out what's really going on with these things.
Oh, that's right. This is a rabbit hole, the depth of which I have ever started to go down. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. So anyway, here's some more pictures. This is just such a beautiful building, just gorgeous. So here is
again that last one.
This one?
The last one you were showing. This is the one that had the flood and had the stairway. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, this is the Mormon temple in Salt Lake.
Yeah, and then it was originally built when?
Well, the records indicate 1858 or thereabout.
Oh, wow.
It was started, and it took about 20 years, I think. So late 1800s is the official date for this. But the question, obviously, that people, when you look at these buildings, have to ask is, when did this mud flood occur? And if it was in the second half of the 1800s, during or after this building was built, then there may be a rational explanation for this. However, if the mud flood took place before that, you have to call into question your timelines a little bit. So
right.
That's why the theory that this may have been built prior to the 1850s, may have some validity. Don't know, but something happened, as has happened to way too many buildings around the world, to submerge parts of floors or even multiple floors below ground to not question.
That's amazing. Right.
So here's an example again in Moscow of another example of Tartarian architecture. Again, looks like there's some sort of antennas on top with some kind of antenna work along the sides of or the bottom of the spires as well.
Again, this is doing all three things. So very fascinating.
Okay. Another example, you might, seeing this alternating red and white in here, I wonder whether this may have been some sort of a power generation. I'll just throw the question out.
At one time, but I even got that Salt Lake City one was at one time and then is no longer. So this one's just receiving right now. Okay. And that's why I'm kind of curious. I mean, I'm so curious. Were particular buildings in place at one time that were really working off of each other, and when one was gone, they no longer worked?
Right. I think you've hit on a really important component of this. These things were all linked in some fashion, and when some component of the technology was lost, it may have forced the whole system to fall down or not work.
Right.
So here's the.
Were you going to say something, Bill?
I was just. I'll wait.
Okay.
Well, that's okay. Here's again an example. This is the Moscow Technical Building, and again we're seeing these, symmetrical spires on top of this building. and then there's some other buildings in the back there. But it seems as though that matching of spires seems to be an important component.
Beautiful. It does all three things, just so you know.
Okay. Here's one in Myanmar or Burma. Again, it may look a little bit different, but you can see the concepts are exactly the same. So this part of the world, and again, this is very similar to the design that Richard Hoagland showed last night as occurring on the moon. So interesting. Another example of some of these spires in Myanmar as well. And this is from 1855. Here's a building in Newark, New Jersey, 1918. I used to live in suburban Essex County. I know this building no longer exists, as do a lot of these, what seem to have been fantastic Tartarian architecture in Newark. Here's a building in New Orleans, again, classic Tartarian architecture from 1900. And another example of this architecture. And now I'm just going to point this out. This is a contemporary picture, but I think it's fascinating that you have these three towers in the background. This is the Empire State Building, I believe. I'm not sure what this middle one is, but I believe the one in the back is the New World Trade Building. So if some
building in the middle.
Pardon me?
Citibank.
It could be, but I would have thought the Citibank building would have been further north. I'm not sure. I don't know. I guess the question would be, for either of you, do you sense that these towers are currently working with any sort of free energy or as part of any sort of a free energy system?
The Empire State Building, I get as a transformer and a receiver.
Oops, let me go back.
But I mean, you do, just think about it though. I mean, they put a ton of antennas on top just so they can receive things, and probably Wi-Fi, towers and.
Well, that's right. So they're certainly going to have those. So I didn't know if you could detect anything from a free energy standpoint. That's the reason I put this in.
Oh, free energy wise, I don't feel that.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Now, here's an interesting one as well. This is the State Capitol building in Albany, New York. Plenty of Tartarian spires and looks like free energy antennas on top of the building.
Well, here they actually have chimneys, right? Where the ones before you couldn't find chimneys anywhere.
That's right. That is true.
So isn't that interesting? And I don't feel that this has any of that free energy coming to it. So it'd be interesting to see when that was built.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a date on this. So that would be something to go back and check. Here's some more Norwegian and Russian churches. The Norwegian church seems to have the dome. They've got, well, here we've got two cones and one pyramid atop this church, all with the same geometry.
Now that's using free energy. The one on the right, I don't feel like is at all.
Okay. Okay. All right. This is conjecture, but I'm not sure that those are Christian crosses either. It almost looks like they might be antennas.
Antennas, yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Here is a beautiful Tartarian building that was in Ottawa, Canada, in 1876. Again, just all of the antiquitech around here on the top and around the sides. And just look at all of these towers over to the right as well.
It's using free energy. I want to know, is that still standing?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Oh,
A lot of these buildings are just have been taken down. So I don't believe it is. And we'll stop probably here with a couple of these from the American Expo in Buffalo in 1901. But Buffalo was yet another one of these cities that had an exposition. We saw some of those buildings last week, and here's some others with some beautiful illumination. Now, electricity in Buffalo, for those of you who may remember, Tesla was awarded the contract to build the first plant and to do alternating current off of Niagara Falls, which powers most this electricity that's being shown here in Buffalo in 1901. But I think we saw this picture before in an earlier slide, but this is part of that Pan American Expo that was held in Buffalo in 1901. We'll do one more and then we'll call it a day for today. This is an important picture in my view, because if you'll notice the date, 1799, this is from the Champs-Élysées in France, and it clearly demonstrates that there was electric illumination. You'll see two pyramids back here, as well as this central object, which seem to be potentially the sources of illumination, but they've certainly been, there's lights everywhere around this area, and this couldn't have come from, to my knowledge, any available energy source that we're aware of at that time.
Well, you can see the shadows of the people on the ground, so clearly illuminating them.
Right, right. So, with that, we'll stop for today. We'll continue back next week. We'll continue these slides. Again, for those of you who are have questions or comments, please feel free to join us live next week as well. I'm going to go over the rest of the comments from the people who are watching on the live stream. So let's see. Michael Phillips says, look into the architecture of the ghost cities. They may be re-implementing the architecture. Not sure. Anyway.
that's probably the original one in Turkey we were looking at.
I see. Okay. And then Hatley says, right, the Kremlin is an ancient fort on the design of the city of Jerusalem. I was there in the 90s. Michael as well says, if the 5-point star, for example, are receivers, can the idolic nature of ceremonial flag worship be an energy harvesting technique? There's too many flags with the 5-point star on them.
He's right.
Okay. So that means that the 5-point star is an energy receiver as well?
Yes.
Okay.
One time this couple was trying to sell their home, and they couldn't understand why they weren't selling it. And I said, get rid of the Texas star in front of your house. Within the next day, somebody put an offer on the home.
Oh, fantastic.
I know. It's just interesting how energy like that works, and people just don't understand it.
Right. So we're going to take a break for today. We'll be back next week, and we're going to pick up where we left off here. As you can tell, we're starting to see patterns developing in this architecture that do most definitely indicate free energy and in this society. So, Lori and Bill, any closing comments for today?
No, we got our work cut out for us for the week. That's all I got to say.
Oh, I know. This is, if any of you also have videos about this topic of Tartaria, that would be of interest to us. I know Michael has been sending me some, and
well, Deb Johnson sent a really great one over the weekend, Charlie, that you and I looked at. That was just like every conspiracy theory that we ever maybe suspected. It was like confirmed through that video. So that was a fascinating one.
Okay. Bill, any
connected to
closing,
the Tartarian Empire. Yeah.
Bill, any closing comments?
Oh, did we lose Bill?
We may have. I guess we did. So we'll close up for today. Thank you for watching. As always, tell your friends about Stargate Pyramids, and particularly about this series that we're doing now of live streams, Pyramid Quest. You can watch this every Monday at noontime on the YouTube Stargate Pyramid page. But you can also link up and join us live on Zoom and ask your questions on a live basis. So until
Bill
next
lost
week,
power.
that's right, Pyramid Power. So until next
No,
week.
Bill lost power. That's how he's not on here
Oh,
anymore.
Bill lost power. Bill lost
Yeah,
power. Oh, he needs
so
some of this free energy, I guess. So
that's exactly right.
until next week, we thank Lori and I and Bill in absence. Thank you for watching, and you have a great day.